or I can do it. Yeah, I feel comfortable. I'm a teacher. Hi, folks. Welcome. Please find a seat if you don't have one. Find someone seated next to you, so you might need to scoot over 1 or 2 seats. And I want you to think about and then discuss with someone next to you. What's a moment, a place, a person? It could be an activity. It could be one time or many times where you felt connection to something far greater than yourself. So some feeling of awe, some feeling of I'm part of a far greater universe that I'm much smaller than, but some crucial part of. So think about that moment, that place, that person, that activity. You felt that? And think if it changed you in any kind of way. And it didn't have to. The answer could be no. But think about it if it did change you in any kind of way. And really, scoot over, find someone sitting not too far from you, and share that with them.
Thank you. I don't mean to interrupt these beautiful conversations. I've been hearing some great things, and I got to also engage in. It's nice to think about these things. I really appreciate this question. And my name is Emily. She, her pronouns. I'm a community minister here at Judson. So excited to be back for another Judson Arts Wednesday. These are happening on Wednesdays. This year, 2023, we're trying to bring them back as consistently as possible. But if you'd like to see when the next Judson Arts Wednesday is, you can always check our website or our Instagram to see when the next one will be and what it will be featuring. We're so excited this evening to have a wonderful talk with our guest speaker. And to introduce our guest speaker, I'm going to turn the mic over to Brent.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks to everybody at Judson, too, for supplying the space tonight. I'm Brent Rodriguez-Plate. I'm the executive director of APRIL, the Association for Public Religion and Intellectual Life. We do a handful of things. We operate the journal Cross Currents, which has been going on for 73 years now. We have worked with, traditionally way back in the 20th century, we did, most of our work was sort of, it was a Jewish Christian organization, and came out of World War II, and a lot of the work that we published in Cross Currents with everybody from Martin Buber to Hannah Arendt to Karl Barth and Paul Tillich, and then as we got up closer to the end of the millennium, we started branching out beyond sort of the Jewish Christian trajectory and became much more interreligious, interfaith, and have worked with a number of Muslim and Buddhist groups over the years and publishing them. I've also been very committed to social justice work and began publishing feminist theology back in the 1960s and queer theology in the 1980s, liberation theology in the 1970s. So it's been really exciting for me to be able to become director of this great organization. This is actually the first event we've been able to do in a number of years, and not just COVID related, but a number of things have happened. So I'm really excited to be able to be here tonight with you all. Really thankful to Judson for, I said, we're looking for a great space to do this. We've got a great speaker, and Judson just said, hey, come on down, and so really appreciate all the work that Melissa, who's not here, but Emily and Greg, and actually Melissa just walked in right when I said her name. Hi, Melissa. So really appreciate Judson's teaming with us on this. I want to introduce our speaker for tonight, and I got to know Zisl a year or so ago, I guess something like that, through another person in this room introduced us, and Zisl was working, it was coming out of the pandemic, and was working on this really unusual piece of writing that was part personal memoir, part kind of a queer autoethnography, part anti-racist, pro-love piece that just wove through the morning prayers and rewrote the morning prayers. And I just really loved this kind of work that Zisl was doing on this. So I was excited to be able to actually take one of our issues of Cross Currents, which we usually run as a quarterly journal, and we get articles in, and we write 4 or 5 articles, a few book reviews, this kind of thing, that you'd see in a journal. But I was trying to think, okay, how do we fit this piece in? Because it was too long to be an article, it was too short to be a full book. So we just kind of thought about it, and we figured out a way to actually turn that one issue into a book itself, sort of a smallish book, and a couple copies of it in the back, and there's actually some flyers up there if you're interested in it. So some of the talk that we'll hear tonight is taken from that work, so you're welcome to order your own copy of the full-on version of it. It's really just wonderful, wonderful writing. So really appreciative to have Zisl with us tonight, who is going to lead us through. I really actually don't know what we're going to hear tonight, but I'm quite certain it'll be great. So Zisl's an educator and has worked with a number of anti-racist endeavors over the years, written for online magazines and other kind of things along the way, and does several other things as well that I will let them sort of discuss and talk about. So thanks so much for being with us tonight, Zisl.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And for all the folks live streaming in, hi, wherever you are, thanks for tuning in that way too. This is one of the really wonderful, lovely pieces of art that I was lucky enough to have grace my book. It's by Itai Rogers Fett, who called it the Unendliche Welt, in Yiddish, World Without an End. And written in Yiddish cursive is Ich will reinnehmen das Stickel Himmel durch ein Fenster. I will draw in a piece of the sky through the window. Based on a line of Yiddish poetry from 1929 from Luna Matis. I remember this time early in the pandemic where I spent a lot of time just looking out my window. Felt a lot less romantic than what's portrayed here. It was pretty grimy New York City window. I mean, the window itself was pretty grimed over, and the immediate view across the street was a brown and gray, grimy building. Very, very strange time. I think certainly not only for those of us who are in New York City, but everyone in their particular way across the world and in our particular way in New York City. On the one hand, there were the endless sirens. I lived about 15 blocks from a nearby hospital, and that was close enough that as that first April progressed, one day leading to the next, the frequency of the intervals, the sirens increased and increased and increased. And also this very wonderful experience of, I think it was at 7 p.m. every night. Maybe people remember, yes, I see some nods at 7 p.m. every night. People leaning out their windows and banging pans and shouting and cheering for the essential workers who are keeping the rest of us alive. This book comes from that time, but it didn't start properly in that time. I wasn't able to write. And the first section that I'm going to read in a moment is what happened. What happened in those first months to me spiritually. What happened to me as a writer, and how I ultimately returned to writing. On the 6th morning of Passover, I woke up with a headache, cough, and sore throat. It was impossible to get hold of my doctor because he was volunteering in the hospital. A friend of a friend prescribed me azithromycin and zinc. It seems like maybe they help, he said. It's mostly anecdotal at this point. My symptoms worsened a little. I lost my sense of taste. I feared the abyss. My symptoms plateaued. I began to recover, though for weeks I would remain exhausted and unable to taste the food I put in my mouth. My soul did lonely somersaults of relief, of deliverance. I returned to work. Months passed. I thought of writing a piece about my aching loneliness entitled Terrible Need. I did not write it. I hosted sprawling outdoors, socially distanced summertime Shabbos Sabbath dinners. This was on the roof. The giant cockroaches, I'm sorry to say, because it is New York. I stayed up too late worrying about my immunocompromised family members. I missed seeing strangers' unmasked faces. I worked with disability justice leaders on an op-ed about the ableist policies that endangered their lives, and watched one mainstream publication after another reject it. One of my most vulnerable family members tested positive for antibodies, and I wept retroactive tears of relief because I'd understood he had been sick and had survived it, and we've been living in fear that he wouldn't. I left the city for the first time in 4 months that summer and went with a dear friend to lose ourselves in the mystery of the woods. I did not daven, which is one of the Jewish words for praying. I still felt the terrible need for others, for more than this. Summer ended and Elul dawned, the Jewish month in which God tells us, I belong to my beloved, and my beloved to me. It is the season of return. Tshuva, which means repentance, also means return. Although I am not generally an early riser, for the past several years, I have tried to make it to the morning minyan, the morning congregation, for Rosh Chodesh Elul, the first day of the month of Elul, to remind myself of what is at stake in the days of awe that lie ahead, and to resume a daily shacharis, that is, morning prayer practice, that has often lapsed during the fancy-free days of summer. I don't want, God forbid, that when on Rosh Hashanah comes, I should beg God for bounty and forgiveness, that I should approach God as a stranger. Let me beg my beloved as a beloved. But this pandemic year, it had already been 6 long months since I'd done weekday davening, daily prayer. There was a Zoom minyan offered on that Rosh Chodesh Elul in one of my communities. Not a proper minyan, that is, an enactment of a full liturgy carried out by a complete quorum, but rather a standalone Hallel service, songs of praise and rejoicing from the collection of Psalms. I joined 20 minutes late after a work meeting ended. By that time, it was practically already over. So I waved goodbye to my friends, colleagues, and teachers, some of whom I had once davened with side by side 3 times a day, every weekday, for months on end. The next morning, I davened. These next words, and most of these words, I wrote during the first pandemic winter, which for me was a low point, and for many of us. I am starved for intimacy, worn thin by the long, vigilant months whose watchword has been distance. Some mornings I wake up with a terrible ache in my chest, a lonely, echoing cavity that pins my limbs down to the bed. I lay there and recite the Moida Ani. I thank God for returning my soul, and in Jewish, also, it's a cognate for breath, neshama, my soul or my breath, to me. I thank God for returning my soul to me from my slumber, which Jewish tradition calls 1/60th of death. Also a line from the rapper Nas, which points to that too. I know you like that, Ryan. I get up. Like our priests of old, I raise my hands and pour a beaker of water over them, readying myself to utter God's holy name. This is the first thing I do in the mornings. I utter these words of thanks and then ritually wash. I thank God for making me a Jew. I really do. That's the line. It's a 2,000-year-old line. As far as we can tell, it's based off a line from the Greeks, who had a habit every morning of saying, thank God for making me a Greek rather than a barbarian. And then Jews who were conquered by Greeks got that tradition from them and said, well, thank God for making me a Jew, even if we were conquered by the Greeks. I thank God for making me a Jew. I go daven. First, the binding, arm, and its blessing. Forehead, and its blessing. Fingers. As I wrap tefillin around my middle and ring fingers, I recite God's words to us. I will betroth you to me forever, and I will betroth you to me with righteousness, justice, kindness, and mercy. I will betroth you to me with fidelity, and you shall know God. That comes from the prophet Hosea. The black leather straps splayed across the back of my hand now spell out the letters Shin, Daled, Yud, Shin, Daled, Yud, Shaddai, biting one of God's 7 holiest names into my skin. I move through the mantric rhythms of Shacharis. I arrive at the ashrei, recited 3 times every day, and it's like greeting an old friend, or rather, like coming home. The way you say crystal clear in Yiddish is klor v'yayid in ashrei, clear as a Jew davening ashrei, 3 times a day, every day, for a whole life. There is a home inside these words, and I share it with my people. My mouth is filled by its rolling reishes and lameds. I touch the tefillin box on my left bicep, which also contains the name of God inscribed on a scrap of parchment inside of it, and I recite the first half of the verse, Poiseach es yodecha. This is from the Ashrei, it's one of the Psalms. You open your hand. Then touching the tefillin on my head, I complete it, Umasbil kol chai rotzain, which is usually interpreted, you open your hand and provide every living being with that which they desire. But sometimes I read the Hebrew more directly, the way a mischievous old chassid, a psychotherapist from Borough Park, once translated it for me. He said, it's not literally and provides every living being with that which they desire. The line really reads, provides every living being with desire. That's what God gives us. It's desire itself. One night, the week before last, as I was quarantining alone, again, this is this first pandemic winter, I'm writing this, preparing to spend time indoors with my parents for the first time in many months, I felt a surge of crushing loneliness, followed closely by despair. The feeling that there must be something wrong with me to have felt already so lonely for so long. And then a little later, a soothing thought arose. How beautiful it is. How much you love being with other people. Right? That's what my loneliness pointed to. My missing other people. I wanted other people. How beautiful, darling, your desire. So that was how the project started. I went back to davening every day, and as I went back to davening, I started feeling more again too. That winter I lived in a house with a backyard, and I would go out to the backyard. Sometimes it would snow on me, or it was really cold. One of these, kind of tenement backyards in New York City where there's a whole block of buildings all looking in on a bunch of backyards together. And I'd sing my songs, and sometimes people would shout at me, or sometimes they'd encourage me. No one ever said anything nasty. I just mean it was kind of part of the talk in New York. And I just started to feel more. I just started to... And honestly, it was often the only thing in my day that really brought me awake that winter. I was just stuck at home working and not doing enough and really worrying about some very vulnerable people in my life. And that made me want to write. So I would go daven every morning. I would write a little bit about what I had davened. And over the course of the winter, that formed the draft of what ended up becoming this book. It's kind of built on the backbone of the traditional liturgy. And I began to conceive of what davening was doing for me in a way that's riffing on Abraham Joshua Heschel's famous conception of Sabbath, Shabbos, as an island in time, what he calls a seed of eternity that Jews return to once a week, that supersedes the particular vagaries of space, of what's happening around us, and connects in this kind of vast web. and also whatever even catastrophes might be happening in that particular time. I began to conceive of what I was doing every day during my weekday davening practice as marching across the continent of time. Because the pandemic was showing me in a very difficult way that life is very precarious and very short. And particularly people like me who are raised, white and male and with enough money to expect to go to college and so forth and be whatever you want to be. It's easy to forget that life is precarious, very, very mortal, very short, and built on the backs of many others who are taken advantage of. So I was face to face with my mortality and just kind of adrift. The pandemic for me was a kind of a wound in time. There were no days. It was one endless blur after the other. And then davening every day was this march across the continent of time, and I wasn't alone. Because the words that I was saying were the words that had been spoken by my ancestors and their cousins in various variations of the liturgy for 2,000 years. And that made me think, maybe there'll be others after me too. Maybe there are others right now. There's a home in these words. Okay, so that's the introduction to the project. I'm going to show a few of the wonderful images that were included. Again, this was by Itai Rogers-Fett. I encourage you to check out their work on Instagram. The cover image is by Sterna Goldblum, who grew up Hasidic and is a queer artist based in Chicago. A few of Sterna's works are in the book and also gracing the cover. Part of the gift of being so alone during that chunk of the pandemic was not being in the public eye. As much as I missed other people, there's also certain kinds of disciplines and punishments and pains that are imposed by us in the society we live in and the public we live in. I've been doing my nails for years, but trying to wear a dress sometimes. Trying out using he, they pronouns. Other kinds of exploration that I was able to do in the quiet, lonely privacy of that time. And when I saw this image, I just knew I desperately wanted it for the book. I think because, well, I don't know. What do you folks see in this image? What do you see here? What does it say to you? Yes, Judy.
They're home, but they're outside.
What makes you think they're home? Yeah, they have their little chairs, right, kind of juxtaposed with being outside. Yeah, so inside and out. And the image on the right is very domestic in a certain way, in a very certain kind of way with the challah, too. What else? Oh, I should say one other thing. Actually, you go ahead. Yes. Say louder. It is the same person, yes. Mm-hmm. Looking off into the distance in the corner, I can say that, yeah. Nice. Nice. Good. Anything else? And yes, and there's, right. I think it's a vine. I think it's a reddish vine of some kind, yeah. 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 Wonderful. For me, there's, so part of it's about gender, about the ways that traditional Jewish femininity and masculinity are both binding and also part of who I am, as is true for the artist Sterna, who grew up in a Hasidic community as a girl. And also the sort of free exploration of queerness. And yeah, there's some way where there's a kind of queerness that I want, which has creativity, it has rebelliousness, it has fun, it has sexiness, it has play, it has danger, it has challenge to the status quo, it has total independence, and freedom of individual self-actualization. That at the same time is really deeply rooted in where I come from. And that I'm not only just who I am now, I'm also where I come from. And I'm also where part of who the next generations will be. I'm part of that chain on the continent of time. So, question for everyone. If there were a God, and I know enough about the crowd to know that there's a diversity of opinion on that, what I say in the book is I do believe in God, but I could be wrong, so I'm open to whatever folks might say. If there were a God, would they pray to themselves? If there were a God, would they pray to themselves? So think about that just for a moment. If there were a God, would they pray to themselves? And take a minute, find someone sitting next to you and just give, it doesn't have to be the most fancy, sophisticated answer to what's a pretty weird question, but talk to the person next to you, tell you what you think. All right, folks, wherever you're at in your conversations, we're going to bring it back together. This question was not originally asked by me. It was originally asked by the rabbis of the Babylonian Talmud. So before we see their answer, I'd love to hear, does anyone have anything they'd like to share? If there were a God, would they pray to themselves? Yes. Say nice and loud. Nice, love that. So perhaps by, say, creating humans, you could pray to yourself by creating humans who then pray to you, if you were God. We're not going to make you God, Mari. That's a bad idea, but... Any others that folks want to share? We ready to see the, yes, in the back. Make nice and loud, Emily. And? Okay, right. Right. Fair enough. To answer this question, is it someone reciting a prescribed liturgy? Is it a heartfelt moment of entreaty? What is it? That's a great question. All right, let's see what the rabbi said. But before that, I want to tell you what made me look up what the rabbi said about this, or at least what made me bring what I had learned about that into this book. The liturgy praises a God ad nauseum, right? It doesn't condemn a God. It doesn't invoke anger at God. It tells us to praise a fundamentally good God. And I realized, I'm davening this at a time where it's never been clearer to me the state of disaster we live in. The formatting you see here on the right is from the liturgy in the Hebrew, translated on the far left, more or less literally. In the middle is just my own meditation on it, What the hell am I praising God for? God, the God of coronavirus, God, the God of climate disaster, God, the God of white nationalist insurrections, God, the God of my family members' severe illness. I'm supposed to praise God with every breath? Every breath? And the question isn't really, why praise God? Because it's an absolute miracle that I'm here with you right now, that Judson Memorial is hosting this, that I woke up this morning, that the sky is blue, how much beauty and love and kindness and pleasure there is in the world. Every day is a miracle. And the tradition is very good at reminding Jewish, and it's part of Jewish prayer, reminding us of that fact. But the liturgy doesn't seem to make anything of the fact of God seems to be also the God of horrible disasters. So I thought of this section from the Babylonian Talmud. And can I get a volunteer? Someone can read nice and loud from Rabbi Yochanan to the end of the first paragraph, also praise. Very back, yes.
Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yosef, from where is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be, praised? It is stated here, I will bring them to my holy mountain, to make them joyful in the house of my prayer. The verse does not say the house of their prayer, but rather the house of my prayer. From here we see that the Holy One, blessed be, also praised.
This is so the rabbis were incredibly careful and creative readers of the Jewish Bible. And they're being playful here, right? So they're saying, we have a verse from Isaiah. It says, I will bring them to the house of my prayer. And they're reading it over literally to say, my prayer. Oh, God said the words, it's the house of my own prayer. God must pray as well. Right? It could have said the house of their prayer, of the Jewish people's prayer. It says the house of my prayer. Okay, so now they've established in this kind of winking way, yes, God prays. That's the beginning of the answer. But then the next necessary question is, well then, what does God pray? And there was a hand here. Could you read from Rav Zutra to the end? Okay, right, so take a moment with this. God is praying to themselves that their own mercy will overcome their anger towards Israel, which is a stand-in for the Jewish people, that's what it means here, for our wrongdoings. right? There's an rabbinic imagination of God as having kind of equally counterposing qualities of mercy and judgment. And judgment could just be translated as strict adherence to the letter of the law, and mercy could be saying, well, I really love these people. I really love my creation. Maybe I don't need to adhere to the strictest letter of the law. So that's in the counterbalance, and we imagine, or the rabbis imagine, God as praying to themselves for their own mercy. So I'm going to read a little bit about what I said about that in the book. So the rabbis who composed this poignant image of God as creator, judge, and loving parent recognized that if humanity were to be judged dispassionately, according to the strictest letter of the law, we would be found horribly wanting. Look at the world today. Look at human history. Can we really claim with any confidence that our good deeds outnumber our evils? I certainly couldn't say that. I know both exist, but I couldn't say that. And the rabbis, that was true in their time too, and what they knew of the world. If humans were more kind than not, more just than not, more loving than not, then we would not need this midrash, this interpretation, right? God wouldn't need to pray to themselves that their mercy should overcome their anger. Or more carefully said, we would not need to imagine such a God, right? We must imagine a God who prays to themselves, or the rabbis have to, who prays for the mercy to overcome their judgment because humans have done so much horrible stuff to one another and to the world. So the rabbis use this midrash as a pious vehicle to raise an implicit question that they would be that would otherwise be too impious to say out loud, right? So I'm claiming they're implicitly asking, or saying, there's too much evil in the world. How can God allow it, right? They can't allow themselves to say that because their whole project is too pious. But reading through the lines, God only needs to come up with, again, this prayer that they're imagining God saying to themselves is only necessary in a world where they're saying, why is the world so evil? What is happening? And what does that mean about our Creator we pray to every day? So in response to their own questions, the rabbis offer up an image filled up with pathos. God is both petitioner and judge. God looks a lot, lahavdil, different, separated. God looks lahavdil a lot like us. A supplicant who prays for undeserved mercy. To stretch this dangerously, that is almost heretically further, the theodicy, the explanation for the theological explanation for the existence of evil, the prevalence of evil in the world, in this midrash, is that God wants the world to be kinder, but it is almost as if God is weakened by our inadequacies and sins. And so it's not capable of making it kinder, right? God wants, in this rabbinic imagination, to treat us well, to be merciful towards us. But it's a struggle because we haven't earned it, and God has to beg themselves, maybe, right? There's not an answer here. There's a question. There's supplication. Can I, meaning God, can I get my quality of mercy to overcome my quality of judgment? So God is almost imagined here like us, like the powerless petitioner looking up in the sky or wherever and saying, please, please. It's got to be better than this. Through our own manifold cruel and wicked deeds, we make it difficult for God's merciful aspect to win out. And yet, that is exactly what God wants with all their heart, for their merciful aspect to win out. That is God's unmet desire. So the Midrash continues like so. In the Babylonian Talmud. This is the next section. We've had a couple of wonderful readers. Can we get another one to read from similarly to, I don't know, read a few sentences and then we'll pick someone else. Yes. Yeah. You can finish up.
The Holy One, blessed be, nodded their head and accepted blessing.
Whoa.
This event teaches us that you should not take the blessing of an ordinary person lightly. Yet God himself requested and accepted a human's blessing. All the more so must we value the blessing of any other person I or love.
Okay. Again, so this is the next section in this part of the Talmud. And what we're seeing here is Rabbi Yishmael has a holy vision, or perhaps has a prophetic moment where he enters the inner sanctum of what was the holy temple, the second temple in Jerusalem. And he has this vision of God. And incredibly, God says to Ishmael, "My child, bless me." So this is similar to what we heard earlier, this idea of creating these kinds of children who can then praise you, who are both separate but part of you. And Ishmael recites the blessing that we just heard earlier. Now, as a reader of this text, why do I think this is? I think it's because where Ishmael is supposed to have said, I don't know, how do you bless God? Well, I'll just say how God blesses himself. That's how I bless God. I'm going to imitate how God blesses himself. So Ishmael gives that blessing, and the Holy One accepts it. And then there's this addendum at the end, which is very lovely, that if God would accept the blessing of a human, then all the more so we should accept the blessing of any person in the world. The word in the Hebrew is idiot, which doesn't mean idiot. It just means a plain, regular person, an everyday person, right? So if God himself would accept such a blessing, we should accept the blessing of anyone. So I'm going to read a few more words about that. And then we're going to look at a couple more of the beautiful pictures in the book and have a little time for Q&A. So we see here Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha learn how to pray to God by imitating God's own prayer to himself, and God accepts his prayer. This suggests that we ought to imitate Rabbi Yishmael, who imitates God in asking God for undeserved mercy, right? So the rabbis have this image of God asking themselves for undeserved mercy for us. Rabbi Yishmael repeats that. And that's a model for us for saying, oh, we too get to ask God for undeserved mercy. This, I think, is my best, if still unsatisfactory, answer to my questions above, which were, what if I want to scream at God? Why doesn't our liturgy script us to voice anger, doubt, or betrayal at God? I do think it's a genuine problem in the liturgy, for me at least. When I sincerely praise God in my davening for their kindness and mercy and do not scold them, I'm praying to have a God who is praiseworthy and good. I am praying for God to be the God they so badly desire to be, whose mercy overcomes their wrath, whose love overcomes their fair, harsh judgment. So when I daven, I am not saying, this is how the world is. I'm saying, this is how I wish the world to be. In other words, I am deepening my yearning. Why then rage and complain at God like an ungrateful child? But this too, I am afraid, risks being Pollyannish and repressed. It seems to me that shouting at God could be a very good, necessary response to our experiences of cruelty and domination. But then again, who am I, child of many sins, overlooker of many miracles, consort to many cruelties, to shout at God? And so I am left unsatisfied, but still obligated and still loved. Okay, let's look at a couple of the other beautiful pictures. This is another Stirner Goldblum piece titled, "Who Is This? What Happened Here?" Stirner did a series about the erasure of Jewish matriarchal memory in the tradition under a more patriarchal tradition. And that's one of the things that I wrestle with in my book, is how much more is preserved, particularly in written rabbinical culture, and particularly in liturgy, of Jewish men's experiences than Jewish women's. And again, something that spoke to me is that Stirner is trying to address that question head on with some real rootedness in the tradition and love for it, as well as with some directness and anger. At least that's how I read it. This is a wonderful picture by Hannah Altman, who had a series of pictures of queer liturgical practice. Take a look at this and see how you feel. It makes me smile. This is my Solomon Brager. It's a zoom image. It almost is like hard to see at first that's a zoom image because it's so overflowing the boundary panes, overflowing with color, overflowing with people and life. But it's a COVID era zoom image. I think from Shavuot, I need to double check, the Jewish holiday, which is a celebration of the giving of the Torah. I think it's very important to know also what we're fighting for. I have gone to a lot of protests, and I've been arrested doing it for this and that, and I've been part of people's movements for years and not done nearly enough at times and tried to do too much at other times. And it's good to have anger because the world is not right, but it's also really important to know what we desire and what we're fighting for. This is part of it. This is good. This is the closing image in the book, also by Stirner Goldblum. And the epigram that I use for it is from Psalms, a psalm that's recited every Thursday morning. There's different psalms or songs of the day for every day of the week. Harchev picha v'yomelehu mitzur davash asibecha. Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it. With honey from the rock, I will sate you. Thank you. All right, folks, got a few minutes for questions or thoughts. Anything that's on your mind. Yeah. You got to hit the button.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
So are there prayers of protest in the tradition that you really relate to? Parenthetically, I have never done slichot nearly every day for the week. It's not much, actually not that much, before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But what I actually found is a lot of the Ashkenazic slichot often, are often described as quite depressing, and they are. But they're really prayers of protest. They're like, how can we be subjugated, and often quite critical of the people doing the oppressing. So
Yeah, thanks for bringing that in. You're right, and I hadn't thought about it previously. Also, in the weekday morning, there's a section called the Tachanun, which means pleading prayers. And some of the prayers in there are like, the nations laugh at us while we are slaughtered. Hello, God. Like, are you going to get involved or not? So, yeah, that's in there too. That's a really good point. Great. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, Judy.
It seems like you wrote.
There's a mic for you.
It seems like you wrote by yourself, and did it occur to you to have input, or was your project like, I will just be me in dialogue by myself?
You make me sound awfully solipsistic, Judy. Well, that's a good opportunity for me to thank some important people. I can't thank everyone important by name because I'm writing under a pseudonym, person of mystery here. By the way, please don't post my face on social media because for both professional and personal reasons, there's certain parts of this book that can't be fully out about at this point. First of all, I owe a big thank you to Brent, who is my editor, and who took a risk. You have to take a risk bringing on a first-time author and also doing a new kind of project. So yeah, Brent's recognition was very crucial. I also had writing chavruses. So I had writing partners who I met with regularly. One of them's in the room, so I'll just, you know who you are, and made a huge difference. I suck at writing by myself, truly by myself. I just being able to have buddies to write with on a regular weekly schedule made a really big difference. And those folks also gave input as readers too. It was a very good question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. I was curious about your davening practice now and how your relationship to the davening has felt as the pandemic has shifted in different phases.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was so good for me when we started reconvening in person. It was very complex. It was initially outdoors and masked, and it's a very difficult thing now where some people are barred from participating de facto from certain davening spaces because they're not COVID safe enough for them because they're medically vulnerable in some way or the other. It's a complex thing, but oh my God, it's been so good for me to be back in person. That felt like returning home. And yeah, there's certain things I can't sing by myself. I'll also say this, I am not a morning bird. And my local minyan meets at 7 a.m. and I am the biggest possible booster that you could be for that minyan without ever going. But so I daven on my own actually a lot during the week, and on Shabbos I tend to daven with other people, and that's a good balance to have. Also, I dance when I daven by myself. I've got one of the Psalms has dancing. It's one of the lines are dancing. I dance. Probably wouldn't do that in a crowd of other people.
Hi. I kind of can't, sorry, I can't believe I'm about to ask kind of a theological question. I know, right?
I'm shocked as well.
'Cause we go back and you know that that's not generally where my mind goes. I'm sort of, I appreciate how you said before, like, I believe in God, but I could be wrong. Yeah. I don't believe in God, but I suppose I could be wrong. I generally don't address these issues like in theological terms, but I was really taken, and I'm really intrigued, and I really like your the way you sort of describe God as lacking, as like desiring for something, as internally divided. That phrase that you highlight in the Talmudic text. May it be my will that such and such, such and such. The whole idea of God like not knowing what its will or their will is going to be, like, may it be my will that such and such should happen, that seems to fly like totally against the classic image of God as omnipotent, as like complete unto itself. Yeah. So it's this image of God as like just as divided and broken as the rest of us, which I just find really compelling. But it does seem to be like like seriously heretical. So I don't know. Could you say a little more about like where else do you see that in Jewish or in other traditions, like this idea of like a divided and broken God? Because I find it really moving. But I'm wondering where you see that coming from.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yes, I am obviously very drawn to that image as well. So there's a couple, right. First of all, Jewish tradition, particularly starting with the Talmud, is so polyphonic that meaning it has so many different voices, not necessarily in agreement with one another within the sacred text, that it's hard to make a claim in many ways in the Talmud about, this is how the Talmud looks at God or so forth. But this is definitely one thread. And I would say Jewishly, it's then continued in Kabbalah and then Hasidism. Kabbalah imagines God imagines all of our creation as an act of tzimtzum, as contraction of the Ein Sof, the infinite, right? So they're like, I don't know, God is everything, and everything is God, so how are we this? How did that happen? How could both things? And they said, okay, God contracted, and in that act of contraction, the divine sparks got separated from one another, and that our divine purpose is to reunite these divine sparks that are separated in the world and are deepened by acts of evil. And Kabbalah was invented by the rabbis and the children and grandchildren of the rabbis and women and everyone else who was exiled from Spain in 1492, right? So and Spain was kind of a Zion for those folks, if you look at the poetry. Not all the time, but they were expelled, they were cast out of Eden. They were in exile, right? So that's a theology of exile, right? The world as fundamentally both good and broken at the same time. And the other place I'll point to personally, and I think there are, I suspect there's a real intellectual genealogy here. It's not just happenstance, but I don't have the evidence, so I don't, could be wrong. For me personally, having studied yoga deeply, done a yoga teacher training in Southeast Asia, and learning about South Asian, particularly non-dualist tantric theologies, which understand all of this as a play, as an act of stretching or play between two poles. And the one pole is we're all utterly, completely distinct beings who are unfathomably different from one another and totally independently ourselves. And the other pole is We all come from one and go back to one. And in that theology, there's maybe less focus on brokenness per se, but there is an image of both completeness and incompleteness, right? That I come from God and I am part of God, even while I'm just a tiny, tiny mote in a vast universe, that both things are true. All right, folks, thank you so much for coming. Maybe we'll give the mic back to Brendan. I'll let you close out.
Thanks so much. Thanks again to Judson and everyone for having us here tonight. Thanks, Zisl, for really illuminating time with you this evening. Thanks for everyone who came out from various places. Feel free to finish up the food and wine on your way out. There's a few flyers, I think, left to be able to purchase the book. There's also a couple copies of Cross Currents. You're welcome to take those on your way out if anybody wants to grab one of those on the way out too. Feel free to be in touch with me. You can go to aprilonline.org and find out some of what we do. And I think probably you know how to reach Zisl, but talk to them.
You could talk to me. You
talk to them
me
afterwards and figure out if you want to follow up.
And the book is on was published physically by UNC Chapel Hill Press, and you can find the book on their website.
Yeah. I think you can find it on Amazon too if you go that way. So.
All right, thank you everyone.
Thanks
so
everyone.
Much.